Yeah.
Thanks everyone for coming tonight. Should be a good set of presentations, discussion. We'll see what you think. So, 75 years of mountain search and rescue, a retrospective of Rocky Mountain Rescue Group's service to Boulder County and beyond. So I'm Steve Pendorf. I started back in 1995 and been actively involved in a lot of different aspects of the team and currently serving as president of the board. And one of the things I do is I head up our special events committee, which includes our 75th anniversary, which is fortunately headed up by April as a subcommittee. So April, you'll probably hear this a few times. I just want to say thanks so much for all your work. So. It wasn't just April, it's a lot of folks, so you'll hear other thank yous as well, but we'll start off right with that. So I just have 2 slides here for myself before we really hop into things with our presenters. And this is the Navajo plane crash in 1948. I think it's probably our oldest picture that we have. And it just arrived last week. So, collection of historic items is a work in progress, and we've done a lot of work. That includes April and Dave and many others. And what I like about these 2 is this is 1948, and on the other side we have is more like what we see today. And I was trying to kind of think between these 2 pictures and, what's the similarities, what's the differences? Well, you can see things were pretty rudimentary, and you'll hear stories of that in 1948 when there wasn't many other rescue teams in the country at all, since we were leading the way. And, so we didn't have it all dialed in, but I think the intention, right, is the same. So the intention of being out there and helping someone in need, that's, there's no different today than in 1947 when we started. And that's what I like to see between these 2 pictures. And kind of the same here. This is kind of showing our origins, where we have someone scoping out what we're going to be called, our logo in 1947, and just this past month, pulling an injured woman with a triple tie roll from Dream Canyon out to the road to an ambulance. So then and now, things have definitely changed a lot, from just a loose organization to quite a big organization, from just a few rescues to about 200. So with that, we'll dive in. So I want to introduce Steve Chappell, and I've got a few bios here, so I'll just read those. Steve was originally from Lake Orion, Michigan. He moved to Boulder in the spring of 1996 to start a graduate degree in aerospace engineering, and was voted into membership in 1996. Steve is still an active member of the group. Over his tenure, he's been group leader for 4 years, assistant group leader, president for 3 years. Steve served as chairman of the Rocky Mountain region of the Mountain Rescue Association, and many executive board and committee positions, including currently heading up our leadership development. Steve's an aerospace engineer working on designing systems for human exploration of the moon. And he's been honored to work with and be friends with the kinds of people that drop everything to help others in need completely as volunteers. So, thanks, Steve.
Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I look out here and I see a lot of familiar faces and some that I just met tonight. But would you raise your hand, please, if you are a current member or were a member of RMR in your past? Pretty impressive. And how about people that are here to find out about our last 75 years that aren't members? Glad to see you here as well. Okay. So tonight I was going to give a little bit of a talk about just who we are. I think a lot of people know who we are, particularly the members, but so I'll kind of glide through that quickly and then get on to sort of trying to get to a place where we're going to talk about history tonight because we've got a lot of people here that have been a part of this organization for a long time. So as we all know, we've been around since 1947, an all-volunteer mountain rescue organization. Currently have 70 plus team members, and our main service area is Boulder County, but we still provide mutual aid to other areas, including Rocky Mountain National Park and other areas of Colorado. Within the Boulder County, we work for the Boulder County Sheriff's Office, and we integrate with a lot of other emergency services providers. Our main mission are these three categories, so technical mountain search and rescue, outdoor safety education, and disaster response. And RMR is well known for technical mountain rescue ever since its early days as we developed. There's a few pictures here showing how things are similar over the years and how they've become a little bit different. The picture on the left and the picture in the center are probably a red garden wall from what I can tell, and El Dorado Canyon. You can see some similarities there, but basically evolution in technique and equipment. And then what you see on the right is a more modern picture, but not all that different in terms of how we do things, just updated equipment. What we do a lot of is what we call scree evacuations. So while we do get vertical rock evacuations, they are, and we probably get more of them than most other teams in Colorado combined. What we do here is our bread and butter. So people that are in steep terrain and technical terrain that need to be assisted out or carried out. And so we have to set up rescue systems and bring people out via blade systems. All right, is this working? Okay.
It doesn't bite.
Okay, good. So we do a lot of scree evacuation. We do Tyrolean evacuations, which are another name for highline rescues. That, for instance, in those earlier pictures where I showed El Dorado Canyon, one of the common rescues that we do is on Red Garden Wall. Well, somebody's stuck mid-face, a climber that's injured, needs to be loaded into a litter, brought down the vertical face to a slope terrain. So we do scree terrain from the bottom of the wall to, in El Dorado Canyon, you have to cross the creek. And so we set up a highline rescue. So it's one portion of the rescue passes off to the next in order to get a person from where they're injured to advanced medical care, usually an ambulance or a medical helicopter. And we also do lots of rescues that are really less complicated. That we call them trail carry. So anything that might need just a light belay, but isn't all that technical, but people are a couple miles in the backcountry, we need to carry them out. We'll do that as well. We do a fair amount of search. Almost every rescue kind of starts with a search, but some of those searches get bigger than others and can last for a couple of days. This is a photo from, I think it was around 2008, maybe. Where there was a large search for lance herring in the county. It was in El Dorado Canyon. You may have heard that in the news that it was a person who actually wound up faking their own disappearance and wound up being found boarding a bus in Denver, going AWOL from the Army. But nevertheless, we looked for him for about 3 or 4 days in El Dorado Canyon. We are also involved in avalanche rescue. We don't get a lot of winter rescue here in Boulder County, but we train heavily for it. And we did actually have a response to an avalanche rescue that we assisted Rocky Mountain National Park with in the last several months, shown on the left here out of a Dreamweaver couloir on Mount Meeker. But we train for it, and when we get it, we're ready, or we can support other teams. And of course, we'll go out in all conditions. So winter technical rescue could be anything from something up off of one of the peaks in the Indian Peaks and doing a steep couloir evacuation, or just going out in the winter and having to deal with winter conditions. In recent years, we've always had involvement with helicopters ever since they've been around. In recent years, it's become a lot more organized, and through a program that was set up with Rocky Mountain Rescue, as well as a number of other teams across the state, 4 teams across the state, as a partnership with the Colorado Army National Guard, has set up a hoist program where several members from each team train specifically on how to do this safely and effectively and efficiently. And so we work with them to sometimes transport people, but also to do hoist rescue where there's a winch that's actually in or attached to the side of the helicopter, and the helicopter, such as a Black Hawk, can hover over a patient that is in need of assistance in the backcountry, sometimes very difficult to get to in other ways, be lowered by a winch to the patient, and then provide some assistance, package them up, and then be lifted back out by winch and then into the helicopter. It winds up being, while it puts maybe a few rescuers that are highly trained in more risk, it puts overall less people in risk for less amount of time. So we try to judge when's the best time to do that. And then we also work with a number of air ambulances as well, such as Flight for Life, for what we call lift tickets, small numbers of people being transported into the backcountry. So where we work, obviously we work in Boulder County, and that's where we started. There's over 10 million visits to open space these days in Boulder County. You would imagine just with that number of people getting out that there's going to be the chance that something can go wrong, even if you're trying to do everything right. So we work mainly in any place that an ambulance can't really drive to in the foothills and west to the divide. And we also work closely doing joint trainings and reaccreditations with MRA teams across the state. So we are professional. When people sometimes hear about volunteer mountain rescue, they think the average climber doesn't really have to train, and they can volunteer, but it's actually quite a process to become a member. It can take around a year to become a member. And then we are also part of the Mountain Rescue Association, which serves as basically an accrediting body that each of the different teams around the state and throughout the nation test each other every 5 years to evaluate how well we're doing, and to provide guidance and see if we're meeting up to the standards of basically professional volunteers. We were part of the Mountain Rescue Association from near the beginning. We were the first accredited team in Colorado to the MRA. We also have quite a breadth and depth of medical experience in the team from the volunteers, everything from people trained more in the minimal first aid all the way up through physician's assistants and nurses and medical doctors. But as I said, we are volunteers, and in the early days, back in 1953, there was about 2/3 of RMRG were students. These days, it's a lot different sort of makeup than it was before, but there have been over the years more than 600 students that have taken part in the team at one time or another. These days, I think we're well known for having a highly technical team, so engineers and scientists still make up a decent amount of the team, but there's also teachers and healthcare professionals, rope access technicians, equipment operators. There's a wide variety of people that make up the team these days. We are busy. We've always been one of the busiest teams in the country, certainly the busiest or near the busiest all-volunteer team. We were averaging in recent years around 200 search and rescue calls per year, which puts us in the neighborhood of 8,100 calls since 1947. And the breakdown of the types of people that we assist are, the great majority you see down there on the right are hikers. And then about equal in terms of rock climbing and scrambling, as well as biking, mountain biking usually. And then there's the other category that can be a variety of things, anything from people out flying paragliders and crashed aircraft, or basically any number of things that puts them in need in the backcountry. Our other mission is outdoor safety education. That's always been one of our goals over the years, is to try to prevent accidents from happening. So there's a safety education chair and a number of people that take part throughout the year. We've got website materials, and a lot of teams reach out to us, such as Boy Scout groups and school groups and other organizations, to provide to come to them and provide a talk and materials to help prevent accidents. Disaster response is also something that we do when we're called upon. It doesn't necessarily even have to be in the mountains, but sometimes it is, such as in 1991, there was a train derailment near Pine Cliff that wound up with a number of fatalities, and RMR went there with some of its expertise and helped recover from that, including extracting deceased parties. I mentioned downed aircraft. We've long been able to. There was a group in the team that were electrical engineers, and they came up with antennas and receivers and transceivers to be able to triangulate on emergency locator transponders. We still have that capability today. It's much less used these days than it was before, because a lot of the transponders, when an aircraft goes down, provides GPS coordinates. But we still have that capability to help find downed aircraft in the mountains. Another sort of disaster level response, for those of you that were around in 2003, there was a blizzard, and a Eldora ski area had an avalanche across its access road that stranded a number of people above or on the road during an active snowstorm, where over 6 feet of snow fell in Boulder County, and in some places actually more than that. I remember being up on the peak-to-peak highway, and you couldn't see the road signs because the snow was so deep. And so we provided a lot of assistance there, both initially and over time, to try to access people that were trapped because of the avalanche. The 2013 floods as well, that was a record. 17 inches of rain fell in Boulder in just 3 days. That's basically a year's worth of rain in 3 days. And basically wiped out a ton of roads and other things in the area. And we jumped in, like many other teams in the state, to base out of the Boulder airport to help get people out from places that they were now stranded in because of missing roads. And of course, there's the pandemic. We've continued to try to shift and adjust and train and still be completely available while the pandemic was going on, along with a lot of other agencies and first responders that were out on the front lines during all of that. We list here wildfires. We have provided assistance at command when necessary with logistics and other things for wildfires, but that's not our main job. That's for the fire departments. We've also done a ton of research and development over the years. Those of you that have been around know that that's been when RMR couldn't find something on the market that worked well for what it wanted to do, it had some of the expertise, the best experts in the world that could actually go off and decide, well, let's design something on our own, and not just design it, but also test it and figure out if it's going to be safe. So there's a few pictures here from early days back in the 60s of testing on the Colorado campus in the field house. I'm right in the center here. I think a lot of people pretty much everybody in this room knew Bill May. He was an electrical engineering professor and longtime member of RMR, and he was the heart and soul of the testing community within RMR, and also wrote what was long time known for many years as sort of the Bible of mountain rescue, one of the first books on mountain rescue in 1972. That while its material is still, the material and the discussion about forces and things and common materials is outdated, the sentiments in the book are still directly on. So this night is about history, and this whole weekend is about history, so kind of shifting away from what we do and how did we start. There's, for many years in Colorado, there was really no organized search and rescue, and it was just basically when somebody went missing, climbers, guides, neighbors would come together and try to do the best to find people. The little clipping on the right here was from early 1947, where there was a number of incidents that happened in 46 and 47 that basically there was concerned citizens that came together and said, okay, we have to do something better than just people coming out to try to help, and we need to organize better. So there were meetings called in early 47 to talk about how better to organize. And that was early on as what was called Boulder County Rescue. I've seen different names for it: Boulder County Rescue, Boulder County Search and Rescue. They kind of bounced around a little bit, but that's what eventually became Rocky Mountain Rescue Group. This is just an old diagram from back in the day, early 1947 again, where it showed sort of how things were structured at the time with the sheriff at the top. And then various other organizations were involved as well, from the University Hiking Club to the CMC, but ultimately kind of coming together into a more organized rescue team that eventually wound up for what you see today in Rocky Mountain Rescue. And for many years, for about the first 10 years, RMR was really the only organized rescue team around and covered the entire state and sometimes out of it. And then over the next several years, up through from 57 through 65, a few other teams started coming on, from Arapahoe Rescue Patrol to Alpine Rescue Team and Mountain Rescue Aspen. And then as these new teams started to spring up, it started to be realized that needed to coordinate amongst those teams as well as other sort of less official teams that were doing search and rescue. And so organizations such as Colorado Rescue Association started to be formed in 1963, which eventually became the Colorado Search and Rescue Board in 1970. And they held their first meetings in late 1970, and under the leadership of our esteemed alumni here and current member, Chuck Demarest, as the first chairman. This evolved into what we see today, which is Colorado Search and Rescue Association. And this year, in the last year, there's been a lot of effort in statute and other things to start getting more funding for search and rescue in the state, under the direction of, again, an RMR member, Jeff Sparhawk, as the first paid executive director. More, even going wider scope, I mentioned the Mountain Rescue Association just here in Colorado, but it is a national organization of more than 90 teams that are made up of some teams in Colorado, a lot of teams on the West Coast, and a few along the East Coast, and one or two up in Canada. But again, that Mountain Rescue Association is a guiding framework and works to make everybody better by collaboration. And the current National Mountain Rescue Association president is here in the room with us tonight. Allison Sheets is the current president of that organization. And also internationally, we've gotten involved internationally through the International Commission for Alpine Rescue, which was founded in 1948, has 123 member organizations from 41 different countries. And there are several what they call commissions within that. Some of them are medical focused, terrestrial focused, air rescue focused. And again, Allison and her husband Dale are both delegates from the Mountain Rescue Association to that international community. So kind of shifting gears a little bit back to some history. So the first place that RMR had to call a home was actually the basement of the engineering building on the CU campus back in 1948. And over the years, there's been various basements that we've lived in actually for a long time. Actually, we went from the engineering basement to the University Memorial Center basement, and then there was another room that was basically in the basement of the UMC. Somewhere in there, we were actually homeless for a little while. We went and I think lived, Pride Mark Ambulance gave us a place to stay. And then there was a program that came about that was the Federal Emergency Management Association was surplusing government property for use, for appropriate use. And there were some members that found out about it, and the sheriff got involved and wound up having an old federal, basically a postal truck vehicle maintenance shop over on 3720, donated to RMR from the government, donated to the county, and then the county basically has leased us that land for use as search and rescue headquarters for $1 a year in perpetuity. For future, we're outgrowing that building, and we're currently pursuing funds and efforts to try to raise funds for a new building that will take the place of the current facility on that property. There's it would be hard in a short space of 20 minutes or so to talk about all the significant events that have happened in RMR history, but since there's a lot, but just a few here. There was, back when RMR was young, there was a mid-air collision over the Grand Canyon where more than 100 people were killed in an incident where two planes crashed at 21,000 feet. At that time, there was not really much in the way of organized rescue in the state or in the country, really, and actually some Swiss mountain rescue teams were called in to help. And RMR and I think some other rescue members rescue teams were called in to assist as well. RMR learned, I think, a lot at that time period, in particular, the way some of the Austrians and Swiss were doing things with cable rather than rope and things of that nature. And that kind of grew into what I think a lot of folks know is RMR was only the one, I think the only user of steel cable as a rescue belay system for a number of years. We've since retired that, but it was a part of our rescue cache for a long time. Also in 1969, even though the diamond had been climbed in 1961 for the first time, there was a lot of discussion about what if an accident actually happened on the diamond of the Longs Peak. Could a rescue be performed from there? And in 1969, RMR proved that it could be done by hauling many thousands of feet of rope to the top of Longs Peak and proving that an evacuation could be, a litter could be brought down the face of Longs Peak and a patient could be picked up and then continued on down. Another significant crash, the Wichita State University football team. That was a tragic incident back in 1970 where one of the planes carrying the football team decided not to take the safe route up through North Colorado along the Front Range and across Wyoming and the lower gap of the Continental Divide. One decided to take what they called the scenic route, which was up through Loveland Pass, where at that time Denver had just been awarded the Winter Olympics, and so they were taking the scenic route, and they got into a box canyon, couldn't get high enough, and had tried to turn around and crashed. So RMR, at that time, RMR went in and used some of the cable systems and other things that they began to develop over the years there as well to help with that incident. There was another famous incident at the Black Canyon of the Gunnison back in the early 80s that also used the cable system that RMR developed, as well as a backpackable cable winch. I don't see Lewis and Mariana Dom here, but Lewis Dom and a number of other members back in the day designed an actual gasoline-powered backpackable winch that went with the cable system that we did, and it made a lot of rescues possible, such as this rescue in the Black Canyon where a base jumper had jumped and hit the side of the wall, and his chute, he died when he hit the wall, and his chute caught on the painted wall about halfway down. So RMR members went over with the winch and lowered, this is a picture of Steve Polson getting lowered in, and they gathered the patient up and then pulled him back out in a fairly short amount of time. We mentioned the blizzard and the Lance Herring search and the floods, so I think that unless others have comments on some of the historical missions that I just mentioned here, I think that was all I had, Steve, and hopefully that was enjoyable, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of the evening.
We got a short video here from one of our founding members. Let's see how it goes. Come on. Mr. Dex Brinker. Maybe?
In the early days, I was pushing for a rescue truck, and I had in mind a great big truck, the type of a snowplow. And I talked to some people who were big in four-wheel drive trucks for highway use, the Walter Truck Company. And I found a salesman in Denver who was interested, and he made us a deal on a used truck. And I didn't have any money at the time. The group didn't have any money, but I went off on a design campaign and drew up some sketches of what a truck might look like. Fitted up, I had a big V plow on the front for getting through the snow drifts, you know, going up to Brainerd Lake and all that nonsense. And the idea didn't catch on because, first of all, the truck was too big, and secondly, we didn't have any money, and thirdly, it was the wrong kind of a truck. But a little bit later, John Clark and John Watson decided to try it on a little different scale, and they went down to Pueblo and bought a 6x6 truck. It had tandem axles in the back, but not dual wheels, so it was a 6x6. And the problem with that truck was it was built as an Army cargo carrier, but it was the same truck as the Dodge Power Wagon. And what they'd done is just put an extra axle in the back and extended the bed, but it still had the same power plant as a four-wheel drive vehicle, so it was grossly underpowered. And we took that thing down in the basement of the garage there that we rented a space for a few bucks a month down in the basement of a garage either on Walnut or Pearl Street in East Boulder. And the thing was a wreck. I don't know how they drove it back, but they got it from Pueblo. Incidentally, this Jeep came out of the same area out at Pueblo. They got it back, and we took the thing apart. John Watson overhauled the engine. I overhauled all the front steering mechanism and the front drive, which is quite similar to a Jeep, only just bigger. And we got that darn thing to run pretty good. And then they built a box on the back and painted it yellow and put a siren and a red light on the front. And then they got called out on a mission up to Nederland, that area, and they got the truck out and headed up the canyon, red light and siren, 10-100. I don't know what the call signal is now, but at that time on the State Patrol, 10-100 meant red lights and sirens. And so we were charging up Boulder Creek, 15 miles an hour, red light and siren, and all the traffic passing the yellow monster. So I guess they decided after that they needed to look into a little different kind of mechanical monster, because this thing was so underpowered that I think it was hopeless. But it was at least the first real venture into a vehicle equipped with a lot of first aid and rescue equipment.
So yours was sort of the unofficial vehicle. This was kind of the first official vehicle. Was that?
Yeah, that was owned by the group. This was always mine. I just borrowed the logo and had Gordon Snow paint the logo on the side. And, Gordon had a 3/4-ton truck of the same mechanical base, but it had it was called a command car. It was the kind of car you saw Army generals driving around in, with their attachés and their helpers and their cooks and one thing and another, wherever they were going. And for that size vehicle, that engine seemed to be big enough, but it sure wasn't big enough for this other. But then after Gordon had painted this emblem on my Jeep, he also painted one on the back of his command car, to which he had given the name Bergsteiger, German for mountain climber.
Excellent. So, little history and just getting it done, and I think that's a story that we try for today. But certainly when we started, it was just get it done approach. Whether it's building a whole new vehicle or trying to figure out how to do mountain rescue. Our next person speaking today is Jonathan Huff. Quick history on Jonathan. Jonathan's family moved to Boulder in 1942, and he grew up in Boulder. Jonathan joined RMR in 1954 while in high school. Grew up in RMR and supported the group as treasurer, assistant group leader, and group leader. Now retired, Jonathan enjoys continued hiking and learning, and Jonathan's time in RMR taught him life and love. Jonathan, come on up.
One, two, three. Okay. Just to give you a little bit of connection here. You just heard about the 10-100 red light and siren run up the Boulder Canyon being passed by tourists. I was on that truck. Okay. Food equipment and communication in the 50s. Food. Take things in reverse order. There was no such thing as an energy bar. You could make your own jerky if you wanted, if you had a deer or something that you hunted. There was no such thing as dehydrated food. Good old Gorp was good old raisins and peanuts, and that's raisins and peanuts and nothing else. Honey, heavy canned bread, sardines, whatever you felt like carrying that was basically heavy. The big treat was a small can of fruit cocktail. That's how we celebrated at the end of climbs. The only mixed drink was called Weiler's, which is, I don't know if it's still made, but it's the best lemonade that I've ever had. That's pretty much it for food. You grab something from the shelf and that was about it. Forest fires were mentioned, and the rescue group supports forest fires. Back in the 50s, we fought forest fires. No helicopters, no flame retardant, no coordination. The forest ranger would take you up a trail and say, "There's the fire, fight it." We had Pulaskis, which is a combination mattocks and axe, and what we called grub hoes, which is a combination of hoe and rake. And they told us to watch out for things that would crown, but we didn't really know what that meant. Things were just very different. Okay, equipment. This, which might today be called a wind shirt, we called a parka. This was the only piece of clothing we had that was made of artificial fibers. Everything else was either cotton kills, or wool. That was it. We had ice axes that you could order from Europe. We had aluminum carabiners, which was the only U.S.-made piece of mountaineering equipment. Everything else came from Europe. All of the designs were late 30s, because the design of new equipment had not really started in Europe, and nothing had started in the U.S. at that time. The biggest source of equipment was the U.S. Army surplus store. We used to have one down on Pearl Street. We had GI rucksacks, which were known as European misery sacks. We had wool pants. If you were, normally you had Army ones. If you got lucky, you could get blue ones from the Air Force. And that was really cool to have blue climbing pants. Sleeping bags. When you fought a forest fire, the Forest Service provided sleeping bags. They were made out of paper. If you're lucky, you could snag 2 and keep warm. But it didn't matter because you were working 16-hour shifts, so you just crashed whenever you could. The most unusual bit of equipment I think that we ever used, and we did it only once, was 5-gallon containers of caustic lye solution and hydrochloric acid. Some of you may remember when the letters CU were painted on the third Flatiron. If you climb the third, you can cross the paint that hides it now. Somebody decided to be very funny and put an I in front of the C, so it said ICU. At that point, the city of Boulder said it has to go, and the rescue group carried lye and hydrochloric acid. The city provided elbow-length rubber gloves. That was our protective equipment. We belayed from the bolts. We never used those ropes again. A lot of us never used that set of clothing again. And my friend David Lewis has a burn scar on his back to this day, where his container of lye leaked as he climbed up the third. The equipment has come a long way since then. Equipment of the day. Today you have avalanche transceivers and things like that, or whatever they're called, and probing poles and that sort of thing. We had orange alpine cord, 50 feet, with marks every 10 feet. You'd clip that to a carabiner on you somewhere, and trail the whole 50 feet as you climbed a snow slope. And the idea was that if you got caught in an avalanche, the parachute cord would float, and if somebody was still up there, they'd be able to find your cord and pull it and note the marks and see how far away from you they were, and hopefully pull the cord and trace it to wherever you were and dig you out. Technology. Lights, flashlights. Everybody has their 3-cell AAA headlamp. 4D cell headlamp. That was state of the art. Now 4D cells is heavy, yes, granted. And you put this in your pack and you wrap the cord somewhere around and you have the headband. Everybody says that the new headlights are lighter and better. 4D cells will last longer. And the best thing about these headlamps is that you have a switch here on the top that you can turn on and off with a mitten on. Everybody has their favorite super goggles that go all the way around. Sherpa goggles. That was state of the art. Okay, that's what we used every time. I had one other thing here that seems to have disappeared. Okay. I don't know where it went. You have today lovely ice climbing tools, fancy, sort of similar to ice axe tools that are guaranteed you up vertical ice. We didn't have any of those. When we were doing evacuations from the third Flatiron at night in a blizzard with the surface of the Flatiron covered with a coating of verglass, we just had crampon points and a regular ice axe and an old Army angle piton. That was our ice climbing equipment. Everybody has their fancy helmet these days. This is a Buco motorcycle helmet. It is not light. It does, however, as you can see from the gouges on the paint, protect you very well. So much for equipment, except for the one piece I can't find, which was my development of an ice climbing tool, which was an old rubber bicycle handle grip with an old ice piton jammed into it, all solidified with glue. That was it. That was an ice climbing tool. Just jab it in as you could. Did it work? Sort of. Okay. I'm sorry.
We were going to, just test it, lowering down a little vertical thing and make sure it all.
We can take all this stuff away. It goes back in the upstairs storage closet. Communication, that's what's much more fun. First of all, telephones, or whatever you call them today, did not exist. The only telephone was what you plugged into your home in the wall and dialed with your finger. Radios, we had two. They were each 11 pounds and had 3-foot whip antennas. Carrying an 11-pound radio is interesting, to say the least. We found out, we were on the Colorado State Patrol frequency. We didn't have our own. And we found out that the third Flatiron acts like a parabolic reflector, because we transmitted once from the center of the third Flatiron face, and it was picked up by a state patrolman on the Kansas border. We had several conversations with the CSP headquarters about our use of their radios. We used the 10 code. You probably have heard about 10.4 and things like that. We used 10.20 and probably 15 or 20 of the 10 codes routinely because we were on CSP and we had to go with their rules. We also took one empty 10 code, 1078, and that was never transmitted. But for several years throughout the group, 1078 meant sub. Things just weren't going right. Whip antennas. We had a mission. Climber has fallen from the first rappel off the Maiden. He's on the ground, not on the Maiden, and he's still alive. Well, okay. So we go, Dave Lewis and I are assigned to go check out the Maiden, and everybody else goes to search other pinnacles somewhere on Bear Mountain, Bear Peak. So Dave and I quickly check out the Maiden, and there's nobody there. And it turns out that the whip antenna, 3-foot whip antenna, there's a radio out there with about a 2-foot whip antenna. The whip antenna had broken off, so the radio could not transmit anymore. So what do? Well, you just improvise. This was back in the day when your parka zipper was made out of metal, not plastic. So we jammed the bottom of the zipper onto the broken stub of the antenna and zipped it up and down until we got the right wavelength. And we transmitted to the other radio and organized things from there. What else about communications? We used smoke grenades, U.S. Army surplus. And we didn't have a choice of what color we had. So what it meant was if you didn't have communication because you didn't have a radio, if you could get to a high point, you could set off a smoke grenade, and that said, "We found a victim, bring the stuff, it's time to evacuate." We also used, we had flags that we waved, red and green flags. Red means go, so that means bring the stuff, the mission's going. Red means stop, so there's nothing here. We occasionally used runners to communicate to base camp. Whoever was the quickest runner was dispatched to go. The other best thing we had, and it was really good in the right circumstance, was a flare gun. Flare gun you see pictures of occasionally. It's got a barrel about 4 to 4 inches long, and the shell is about 3.5 inches long, and the whole barrel is about 1.5 inches in diameter. It's like a 4-gauge shotgun pistol. Well, okay, we were doing a third satellite search, and we didn't have any radios. So if we found a victim, fire the green star shell, meaning go, bring the stuff. If we didn't find a victim, it was red. No, nobody here, nobody on the third. So we searched the third with the usual search pattern, up the face, up the north, up the south gully, and we didn't find anybody. So it was time to fire the red star shell. So from the summit of the third, pow, you fire the red star shell up and over and down the face of the first so it wouldn't last in the forest and start a fire. So it landed way down the face and was very spectacular and was a beautiful communications device. It was at 3 minutes before 1 o'clock in the morning, which in the old days, as some of you may remember, 1 o'clock was the curfew for co-eds to be in their dorms. So there were hundreds of co-eds and their boyfriends kissing goodnight on the front steps of all the dorms at CU. And they all saw this star shell. The sheriff's office emergency call, it wasn't even 911 then, but the emergency numbers, was jammed for an hour. We did have to have a conversation with the sheriff's department on that one. That's a quick once-over of communications equipment and food and forest fires. So it was very different. The equipment was simpler, more heavy, not as detailed in its use, but it worked. And we just did the same things that the rescue group does now: search for the lost, carry down the injured, and recover the dead. Things haven't changed at all. Thank you.
All right, so I've got a short video. I think you heard about the gas-powered winch, so a little more info here.
Well, it was a gas-powered device with a capstan, and it had a polyurethane drum, as I recall.
No, it was aluminum.
Well, then we made a polyurethane.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
This was aluminum at that time.
Right, it was aluminum normally, and the winch would have the capability of hauling an entire litter with 6 people on it uphill. So it was used mostly for uphill. But I do remember one little story with the winch with Jonathan Huff, and that was on Mount Evans in our practice. And on the practice, we were going to, just test it, lowering down a little vertical thing and make sure it all was working well.
Yeah.
And we had what at the time was called a shock absorber in the system. And so the litter was hooked to support clip-on slings, and then there was a shock absorber. And that was for the purpose that if there was a sudden loading, cable doesn't absorb energy, but the shock absorber would cushion whatever occurred,
Right,
rather than have the potential of the cable snapping. So Jonathan Huff and I were on the litter, we're going down over the edge, and we came down to a thing we had to step off, and indeed there was a little more loading, and all of a sudden the litter drops 5 feet, which is very exciting if you're on a litter and you don't expect it to be dropped. And I'll never forget that as we put our feet on this ledge and we're totally safe, I said something, I made an expletive, and Jonathan got on the radio, in the calmest voice ever, he said, "The shock absorber has deployed."
That's some good times. All right, next we have Chuck Demarest to talk about Kevin Dye lost on Casper Mountain in 1971. Welcome, Chuck.
These are really varied stories you're hearing tonight, and this one was a very serious rescue, but it had its wrinkles, as well as some of these other things you've heard tonight. Now, I'm the new guy, Jonathan. He goes back when they had the 11-pound radios. I carried one for about a year, and then we got the new stuff. But this is sort of the intermediate time frame now. So 1971, I joined the group, I believe about 1965 or 6. And this was a really phenomenal situation. I'm sure most of the folks here know about it. How many in the audience were on this rescue? Good. Almost nobody. Just a few. So I can tell the story. Well, anyway, this story had, I think, the most dramatic issues that I can recall of any rescue, other than maybe the next story on Mount Yale. In this case, a 9-year-old boy wandered away from a picnic area on the top of Casper Mountain. He was aphasic. He was definitely in needs of mental assistance. He was not weak. Aphasic means he could think well, but he couldn't talk well, basically. He had a habit of wandering. And indeed, as he wandered, he would have his favorite toy, which was a ping pong paddle. And so he would wander through the trees, hitting the trees. This becomes relevant later in the story. In case you don't know where Casper, Wyoming is, I got a quick map here. It's sort of in the east central Wyoming. So imagine that you're in a city of a few thousand people, or I guess maybe 40 or 50,000, and this poor kid is missing. The locals turned out en masse to help. And in fact, they had over 3,000 of them up on the Casper Mountain looking for Kevin Dye. And the search went on. As it started into its second and third day, it became a national news story. lost boy on Casper Mountain. He's wandering, no one knows where he is. We've got to find him. After it went into the 4th and 5th, rumors started getting really severe. He's turned into an animal. He's hiding from everybody, you know. The weather was not bad most of the time, and the altitude was not high. But the national media, CBS, ABC, NBC, and all the local papers made a gigantic story out of this. And the clues came in to the sheriff and the search headquarters literally by the hundreds. There were cabins up and around. And a lot of the people in the cabins reported, we saw him. We saw something in the bushes over there. He's running from us. He's hiding. Of course, there's a lot of deer up there on the mountains. Some people started putting pies on their window ledges to feed him because he was hungry. Seriously. And I think the most hilarious, on hindsight, event was when his parents realized that he loved McDonald's, and he loved Ronald McDonald. And there were two things they proposed. One they actually did, and that was to build a poster with Ronald McDonald and a clock pointing to dinner time and saying, "Time to come home, Kevin," thinking that he was wildly roaming the woods unseen. The second thing that they proposed, which was not done, was to find someone to dress up in a Ronald McDonald costume and hang from a helicopter with a loudspeaker saying, "Come home, Kevin, follow me." Of course, that didn't happen, thank heavens. Then finally, after a few days, getting into maybe it was day 6 or 7, the sheriff said, "We're probably scaring Kevin. We know he's up there somewhere. Everybody off the mountain. We're going to give him a day of rest. He's got to rest." Okay. After 8 days, obviously people feared for Kevin's well-being. The poor city of Casper, very heartfelt concerns for the boy, probably starting to feel guilty. Sheriff Bill Estes of Casper, of Natrona County there, what can I possibly do? Well, he called down to Colorado, to the Colorado Search and Rescue Board, and said, "Do you have any way you can help? Send up some rescue searchers. We need help. We don't know if he's alive or not, but we've got to find this poor child running through the mountains." So indeed, Rocky Mountain Rescue Group and Alpine Rescue Team went up with about 15 or 18 members. Frontier Airlines flew us up gratis. And this is a file photo. This is not on this rescue, but I wanted to show it because on the way up, we got into some serious discussions about how are we going to do this. This has been 9 days or so. Kevin Dye is probably not alive. We don't know whether he is or not, but it's very unlikely he's alive. They're expecting us to be the knight in shining armor coming in to save poor Kevin as if it were easy. That's not. We're going to go up there and they're going to expect a professional rescue team. Take a look at this picture. We became concerned that we're going into Casper, Wyoming, to represent ourselves as search and rescue experts. We have no uniforms, we have no patches, we have no uniform hats, we don't have titles, we don't have any kind of structure that's apparent. We were very professional, as has been mentioned earlier. We knew what we were doing, but we do it a different way than, generals and lieutenants and so forth. But what is going to happen when we walk off that plane with NBC, ABC, CBS, all the media there and the sheriff, and they're going to look at these hippies from Boulder? We were worried. So what do you do? So we needed to take charge and be efficient. We're not hopeful that Kevin was still alive. We felt we were going into a tragedy that we had no business really giving anybody any hope we could do it. So we came up with an unusual plan. And in mountain rescue, you got to think outside the box once in a while. So we decided, let's give ourselves titles. Now, if we have titles, that'll give us some legitimacy. So we had rescue leader, we had information officer, we had a couple of others. They gave me the title of Field Commander Demarest. That's good, I've never had that before. And I thought it would be kind of fun, but seriously, it was for the purpose of establishing credibility when we first met the sheriff. We expected when we got off the plane there would be a collection of people, all interested, including the sheriff, and that what would normally ensue would be some kind of give and take and discussion of everybody here and there and disorganization in general. And we felt we've got to at least get moving on this and see what we can do. So, this is the exit from the plane. There is a small group there. Sheriff Bill Estes is there, and our team is there. And the titling worked. It was really fun. I was introduced to the sheriff as Field Commander. Okay, and he immediately said to me, "Yes, Field Commander, what can I do? What do you want me to do?" And it was obvious. Take us to the rescue site, all of us, right now, quick. We do not want to talk to the press. We do not want to have meetings with people down here. Get us up there, assemble the clues, let us get going. That happened and it worked. Immediately, we were provided transportation. We got up to the top of the mountain. This is the mountain. The mountain doesn't qualify by Colorado standards, of course. But you can see Casper area, the town on the upper right, and you can see the mountain itself is generally highly wooded. The woods were mostly open, but if you look a little more carefully, you'll notice that it's steep terrain as it leads toward the lower plains. These are canyons, and some of them are fairly difficult to work through. I just picked this shot off Google Earth to illustrate the type of terrain we were in. So we sent out our teams right away. We know this is a probably hopeless situation, but you never know. You never know until it's over. So we're going to try and do our best. But remember I told you about a ping pong paddle? Well, holy mackerel. Guess what walks into search headquarters? A kid, not Kevin, with a ping pong paddle. Now this happened before we got up there on the same day. And this boy was well known to the sheriff's office as a juvenile delinquent type, you might say. And he wouldn't talk. The sheriff, "Where did you find it?" "I don't want to talk." "Well, we'd like to know, where's Kevin? Do you know where Kevin is?" "I'm not talking to you." Because there was a real antipathy between this kid and law enforcement. The sheriff and maybe it was the sheriff, maybe it was a deputy, in anger, kicked him off the mountain and said, "Get out of here." So when we got there, the paddle was available. It had blood on it. Now the media was, "Oh my gosh, they're ready to run with this." Was Kevin done in with a ping pong paddle? It's bloody. Well, I got to see the paddle. I definitely wanted to see it right away and see if I could learn anything. It was frayed around the edges, and there were 2 or 3 little spots of blood. Maybe there had been 3 drops. I thought, this is not a murder weapon. This is an attempt to kill a tree and maybe scrape some knuckles. Well, so what do you do now? We have a real problem. We've had 3,000 people up there. There's not going to be any tracking. There's not going to be any obvious clues. We'd have no idea what direction Kevin really went. And if you have a situation like this in search, the first thing you want to do is to limit the search area, prioritize areas. And just for grins, if a kid walks 3 miles, that's about 10 square miles of terrain that if he just goes straight out radially, it's about 10 square miles. That's about 6,400 acres. And it takes about a half a man-hour to search an acre in easy terrain. That's 3,200 hours. And that's only a 3-mile radius circle. We can't do that. What if you walked 4 miles? Or heaven forbid, 6 miles? It'd be 4 times as much area. So you can't do that. So you've got to narrow the search. How do we narrow the search? I want to know where that kid found the ping pong paddle, damn it. Get him back up here. And so now we know that it's not going to work to have more interrogation of this kid by officials and authority. So time to hatch another plan. It was a risky plan, by the way. What we did is we got the media, all the media together, and we said to them, we want you in a press conference setting to ask these questions of the kid we're going to put in front of you. Media said, well, wait a minute. We decide what questions we ask. This is ABC and CBS and NBC. We don't let you tell us what questions to ask. And so we explained the importance of localizing the search and finding out clues about where this paddle might have been found. Finally, after some give and take, they agreed to do it. I gave them 8 or 9 questions, I think it was, and I said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I said, when I point to you, I want you to ask question this, I want you to ask your question, then I want you to ask your question, so on. We then told the sheriff, get all the law enforcement out of sight. Get all your emergency vehicles out of sight. We set up a dais, sort of like this. Kevin would be standing here. I would be standing to his right. He would be elevated a foot above me. I would introduce him. I introduced him as not a boy, but as a man. And as I did that, I said, this is the man who found something that none of the others could have done. He must be quite the woodsman. And he's agreed to take some of your questions. So you can imagine the nervous scene of the media. Well, did it take you a long time to get back to camp with that paddle? Was the sun in your eyes? Did you have to go over rocks? Could you see the sun, or was it shaded by all the trees you were in? Clever questioning. So we had these clever questions, if you will, and he was very forthcoming. He loved to be the person in the spotlight. We knew he wanted attention. We knew he hated authority. So we built him up, and we did that. Okay, I know that's probably taken advantage and manipulative, but we needed to know where that paddle might have come from. That evening, we got a professor of psychology, Ken Jackman from Laramie, and he went over with us the tape that we had of the entire press conference. And with his input and our attention over hours, we tried to sort out what was figurative, what was bragging, what was true, what was forthcoming, what were the salient points that could help us localize the search. At about midnight that night, we said, there's a couple areas that seem like they fit the descriptions that we've been helped with. The next morning, we had 2 teams out, one dog team with a search team and another team by themselves. And so they headed out at dawn, and guess what they found? They found Kevin. He was outside that sort of 3-mile range a little bit, down a canyon that indeed became rather nasty and technical. He was lying in a meadow, unable to move, seriously dehydrated. His doctor later said he would not have lasted that night, but we found him alive. And I'm going to come back to this little news story in a sec. So there he is. Amazing. He looked up and was asked, do you want to go home? And he struggled to say yes. So indeed, carried him up, carried him out. And that's how Kevin Dye was found. The news story that I wanted to come back to, I think, is fascinating because ABC, NBC, CBS never commented on the bogus press conference. Never mentioned it. I think it would have been embarrassing. But the Rocky Mountain News reporter did. And he wrote this bit about it, saying he was very nervous to do it. He said that this isn't how journalism works. And at the end of his comments, I think it's on the next page here, he says, in retrospect, the bogus press conference may have helped to hasten the rescue of a youngster nearing starvation. In staging it, veteran newsmen jumped without hesitation journalism's fundamental taboo, getting involved in the event you're covering. I think we might have found Kevin anyway without this shenanigan, but I don't think we would have necessarily found him that morning. It might have been a day later, and that might have been too late. So, crazy rescue story.
All right, so our final kind of story here is Mount Yale plane search of 1981. And I'm going to just, I'm going to introduce, actually we're going to skip this. I'm going to just introduce Chuck and Ken. So this one's going to be in Jim. So we're going to have the, actually why don't you all come up, Ken and Jim, and we'll be kind of going back and forth between the seats here. So just a quick background on these three speakers. You've already heard from Chuck, but I'll give a quick intro and go on with Ken and Jim. So Chuck came to Boulder from Princeton University with a philosophy degree and physics emphasis. He attended graduate classes at Colorado University in physics, math, and chemistry. And he founded the company Kryptonics in 1964. And I'll just skip ahead really quick here. So he was also the inaugural president of the Colorado Search and Rescue Board, which he referenced on that search, actually, that was called. And he was president of the National Mountain Rescue Association, just like Allison. So a little bit of background on Chuck. Ken moved to Boulder in the early 1970s after graduating with a BA in mathematics. He joined Rocky Mountain Rescue in 1975 until 1979. Served on the board of directors. In 1979, he moved to Seattle to attend school at the University of Washington School of Medicine. Ken's was active in the Seattle Mountain Rescue Council and later in Alaska Mountain Rescue Group. And he came from Alaska today, or yesterday, Today. So maybe our furthest traveler, I'm not sure. And then finally, Jim Adams came from north central New Jersey, just like myself. In 1975, after having enough of work in the big cities, he moved to Boulder and enjoyed spending time as possible above tree line solo. Jim met members from the Colorado Mountain Club in Boulder Mountaineering School and became an instructor. He then joined RMR through 1989. So, welcome all.
How do you want to
Now, yeah.
How do you want to choreograph this?
Sure, yeah.
Go through my slides first.
Yeah.
And then we go over there. Or what?
Yeah. Well, everyone else can sit down and
Okay.
yeah, sure. And then we can rotate. So.
Yeah, I'm going to give the background of this, and then we'll go on to Ken and then Jim for the rest of the story. This was another one of those rescues that you look back on and you say, oh my God, I can't believe it worked. There's so many things that could have gone wrong or not happened right, but we were fortunate, lucky, skillful, whatever. Maybe God was on our side, but an amazing rescue. So here's what happened. On Saturday, the 26th of December, a commercial plane flying over the region of the collegiates listens to an emergency frequency, 121.5 megahertz, which is the signal frequency of beacons. And that's reported. Well, Actually, we'll learn here in a minute that the actual plane crashed on Thursday. And it wasn't until Saturday that any signal was meaningfully picked up. So when the signal was actually detected on Saturday, a search was located, was initiated. The Civil Air Patrol was called, and all they knew was, gosh, it's in the collegiate somewhere by Mount Columbia or Harvard or Mount Princeton, all 14,000-foot peaks, and nasty flying area. For background, if you're not familiar, and I think 90% of the people in this room are very familiar with this is an ELT. It puts out a signal. It's certified. Back then, it was certified for 72 hours at minus 20 degrees centigrade. So it would broadcast for rather a while, but after 3 days, you never knew. Now here was the irony of this setting. No airplane was known to be missing, and no flight plan was unclosed. So there was no open flight plan. There was no airplane reported missing. Nobody knew anything about anything except that the beacon was going off, and the Civil Air Patrol was flying around, and they could not localize it enough to actually find it, or they certainly didn't see any airplane. So guess what? Rumors start. This is a hoax. Somebody threw a beacon out of an airplane. Or maybe it's from a hiker who deposited it up there as a joke. Or maybe there's some other way it got there. But it's getting hard to believe it's from an airplane. And after a few days, the signal's going to go dead anyway. Well, on Monday, RMR got involved on this because the search was about to be called off. And I flew over in my helicopter with my chief pilot, and we flew around looking for it and didn't see anything. We could hear it. We didn't know where it was. We dispatched teams to the side of Mount Columbia, high up, I guess utilizing a Chinook, big helicopter. And just for reference, that's the Chinook, if you're not familiar with them. They're a beast. They give a lot of rotor wash. But the rumors were growing that this search is going to end. This is the last day. That this cannot be a missing airplane. We're going home after today. I was able to get onto a Huey to do some more signal tracking. And here's the problem. This is a little hard to see. But this is from the ELT antennas, most of which were at the airport and based in lowland. And if you're not familiar with these lines, the lines tend to converge back to where the antenna is that's trying to listen to it. All it tells you is the direction. It doesn't tell you the distance. So you get all these lines, and if they all, by some miracle, from different spots, all cross at one spot, that's pretty good knowledge of where the signal is originating. Well, these don't cross. No, they go every which way, all the way from Mount Harvard to Mount Yale to Columbia to who knows where. Now, that's a huge area. It's not an area in the middle of winter you're going to put search teams in on the ground and hike all through that. You can't do it. You got to localize the signal, or you got to do something better. Now, this is the spoiler alert. The red circle is where the plane actually was found. And if you look and you compare these two images, you'll notice how far away that is from where all those little lines, all the lines are aiming and crossing. They were not terribly indicative. Sure, on hindsight, you could probably choose one that was better than the others. But at the time, it was pretty hard to sort out. So we had a mess. I got up into a Huey, and just like all the other folks who'd been flying an aircraft than me earlier in my helicopter, we looked around and flew up the valleys, and yeah, I could hear the signal darn near anywhere. And I said, this isn't good enough. We've got to localize it. Now, that's not a directional antenna in the Huey. It's just signal strength. That means you only know how loud it is. You don't know where it's coming from. So I put on my thinking cap, and I said, why don't I do something clever? I'm going to detune the radio on purpose. So instead of tuning in 121.5 megahertz, I turned it to the adjacent channel. Now, you know, if your old AM radio or your FM, if you're one little click off, you may hear the station if it's a loud station, but it's all distorted. But you'll only hear it if you're close or strong to a strong signal. So I said, maybe if I detune it, and we fly around all these damn valleys up and down, and we'll see if in any of them I hear a distorted signal. So we did that, and guess what? Sure enough, where that red dot was, moving back there, in that vicinity, I could hear a distorted signal. An ELT signal is very distinct. It's a descending tone. It sounds like pew, 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 sort of like that. It's not a very good impression, but it's sort of like that. And distorted, if I won't even try. But you could hear that it was likely an ELT signal on the adjacent channel. If you were to look carefully at the contour lines around the red circle, you would notice at the top of that map, more or less, is Mount Harvard. At the bottom is Mount Yale, and kind of in the middle, off to the right, is Mount Columbia. So this is still a big area. But by getting very close to where that red circle is, we said, oh, I think if we can find an LZ, maybe we can go in on the ground. This is just the inside of the machine, and it shows the radios. You know, oh, these are old, but you know, you can just turn the dial and click the frequency you want. Very simple. And if you're not familiar with an antenna, a ground antenna, this is called a Yagi, named after the guy who invented it. And ours have 3 bars like this. Obviously, this is a summer photo. It was definitely heavy-duty winter up there. But these 3 bars will give you super direction. You can do clever things for the technical people like polarity and things like that by orienting the antenna and so on. So time to go on the ground. Got a team together. We got dropped off. This is still the same day. Early afternoon, I think it was maybe noon or so, in a clearing that was about, I don't really know, but I'm going to guess 3 miles east of the Cronky Lake sort of cirque. And 6 of us were dropped off. 2 of us started up toward the signal. I had the Yagi antenna, and the others I instructed to start beating a trail downhill because we knew this is late in the day, and if we had to hike out, by gosh, it's going to be a long way, and for them to break trail would be great. This was not trivial hiking. This was very deep powder snow. Of course, we had snowshoes, but we would still sink in well over our knees and sometimes up to our waist on some of the lightest powder. So we were really, really working hard. So after 3 hours, and I think we might have gone 1.5 miles or 2, I don't know, but it was incredibly slow. At the place that we were dropped off, the signal strength that I received was only 1 or 2 microvolts. Those are millionths of a volt of energy on the signal. That's not a very strong signal. But it was directional. We went toward Cronky Lake. We got up to the top of this ridge, and all of a sudden, whammo, the signal jumped to 25 microvolts. What that meant was that we're almost certainly line of sight to the beacon itself. And it was probably between 1/4 of a mile and maybe as much as 1/2 mile conceivably, but it was close. That was very, very exciting. So it was late in the day, and I had to make a decision about, it's going to be dark in 20 minutes. The helicopter can take us out if we get back to that LZ by dark. If we don't want to do that, we can continue on. We're in avalanche danger. We're going to be going in the night. We will be spending the night out. And to be honest, we don't think it's likely there's going to be survivors. We didn't know, of course. So we made the decision, I think it was probably the right one, to rush back the trough that we had created to the LZ, hop on the chopper, and go back to base and report our findings, which then became an interesting item for Ken to talk about with the search headquarters. You can just scroll through those.
Thanks, Chuck. I'll just back up just to the first day. I was one of the ground pounders that was on a ridge high up on Mount Columbia. We didn't find anything. The whole time it was snowing hard. There was deep powder, just as Chuck described. Oh, getting ahead of ourselves here. So the next morning there was a, and then I was kind of standing around while these guys were figuring out where the plane was. And we had a high degree of certainty we knew where the plane was, or the ELT. We didn't know for sure there was a plane. And so the next morning, the Civil Air Patrol told us the search is called off. And Bruce Bartram and I had a heated argument. I won't call it a discussion. And a heated argument is kind of an understatement. And they would say things like, well, you know, it's winter in Colorado. They've been out there for a few days, and they're all dead anyway, so what's it matter? And I said, okay, well, yeah, maybe they're all dead. I'll believe it when I see the bodies. And then they said, oh, the avalanche danger is super extreme, which it was. And I said, okay, well, who's going out there, you or me? I'm willing to go out there, and we know how to travel safely in avalanche terrain. Oh, no, we can't take the Chinook out there, and we're just going to call off the search. But eventually we did convince them that they should fly the Chinook to this clearing, and then we had this little compromise where we would get out of the Chinook and we'd see if we could still get the signal, and if we'd still get the signal, we were allowed to search for the airplane, which we knew where it was, so it wasn't going to be much of a search. And Bruce and I were going to go up to the airplane, and Jim Adams and Jim Turley volunteered to break a trail out because the snow was really deep. So we got out of the Chinook, and we actually did, you can't hear anything inside a Chinook, it's too loud. And so we got a little ways from the Chinook, and we actually did hear the signal. And we had this little a promise we made to each other, we'd never tell anybody if we heard the signal or not. But I think actually what we really meant was, if we hadn't heard the signal, we would have gone anyway because we knew where the plane was. So it didn't really matter. And I think our promise was that we wouldn't tell anybody that we hadn't heard the signal. You know, it's a few years later now, it probably doesn't matter. So I had borrowed a oversized pair of Sherpa snowshoes, and Bruce was wearing a regular pair of Sherpa snowshoes, and as Chuck said, the snow was really deep and really powdery. And also the meadow where we were, every step or two, we'd hear this whumph, which means there was really high avalanche danger. So we were careful to stay on a ridge and not get caught in an avalanche. And I would go ahead and break trail, then I'd come back and break trail some more, then I'd go ahead and break trail, and then Bruce could follow me, sort of. He wouldn't plunge into his waist very often, or as often. So we got up to this little ridge, and we knew that the plane was just across a little dip valley, and we got up to the top of this ridge and looked over, and there's the airplane. And okay, we found the plane. So then I walked over to the airplane slowly because there was a lot of snow. And when I got near enough to the airplane, I could see people moving around inside it. That was an incredible moment for me. I will never forget that moment. That search almost got called off, and there were people alive inside that airplane. There were 4 people in the airplane. They were reading from the book of Job. They were fairly religious people, and this was giving them some comfort. There were 5 people originally. The pilot, after the crash, walked off to get help and wasn't seen again until not the following spring, but the next spring, a year later. It's almost certain he was caught in an avalanche. There were footprints that seemed to be leading into an avalanche track, and he was found in an avalanche gully. And the other 4 people on the plane were 2 adults and 2 teenagers. And one of the adults was a woman who we diagnosed a broken pelvis, and the others weren't really injured. And they had been surviving by melting water in their suitcases during the day when it was warm enough inside the fuselage. The fuselage was intact. So this is what it looked like. This plane. It crashed right at tree line at about 11,500 feet, and I think even one of the wings was stopped by a tree, if you can see that. Here's another view. And this is inside. Now, in those days, you could send your gear ahead by Greyhound, and they were from Texas, and they were flying to Aspen. Aspen's about 7,600 feet, but unfortunately, there's some barriers in the way, like Mount Yale, and we think that they weren't really quite aware of the fact that they might have to be a little higher than 7,600 feet before they got to Aspen. And so they were in there, and they didn't have their warm clothes, and they were clearly suffering, especially at night. Yeah, this is the picture that I took. It's a very old slide, but you can kind of see what I saw. And by the way, the wing was very slippery with snow on it, and so the first thing I did when I got to the plane was I fell off the wing, because I slid off the wing. And after a while of getting things going, they called me slip slide, because I fell off the wing so many times. So at that point, we radioed back that we'd found the plane, that there were survivors, and all the rescue teams that had been assisting in the search that had left came back. The two Jims came back up to help us, and a Huey came in to help us get the people, to evacuate the people. So we took the woman with the broken pelvis first, and Jim Adams is going to tell you a little more detail about that. And it was uphill to the Huey site where they landed. And when I got up there, the pilot goes, "Take a break." And I go, "I can't take a break. We've got to get these people up." He goes, "Take a break." He goes, "I can only stay here so long. It's getting close to dark. I'm going to stay here till the last possible second. And however many people you can get up, I'll take out." So the two teenagers came up on my shoulders with one rescuer on each side, stabilizing them. This is 11,500 feet, and at the time I was living in Seattle going to medical school. I was just home on break, and that was tough work going up that hill with each of those teenagers, but we got them up, and then we didn't have time for the last person. So we spent the night in the fuselage with the last person, and it was cold even though we had sleeping bags, and it was amazing how well they did. We took the last person out on the ground the next day. By the way, the weather during this whole time was snowing like anything. No visibility. You saw the one picture with the Chinook, and all you can see above the mountains is just blowing snow. And we managed to get the last patient out on the ground. And this is the front page of the Rocky Mountain News, and you see me standing behind the victim, and that's Rod Smythe, who had helped us with the evacuation, another Rocky Mountain Rescue Group rescuer. So, but for that heated argument, those people would have died. And it's an amazing thought. It's very scary to me still, how close they came to dying. And this is one of the most satisfying things I've ever done in my life. And I'm very proud of Bruce and me for not giving up. We were not going to give up, and we wore out the Civil Air Patrol. Now there's a little extra bit to this story, and that is we drove back to Boulder and got back really late. And next morning, I think I wasn't even awake yet at 8 a.m., and Louis Dom called me up. I was staying at Outpost's house, and Louis said, how soon can you be at the Boulder airport? I go, pretty soon, I guess. Why? Well, the ELT is still going off. And we need somebody to turn it off. Okay. So I went to the Boulder airport, and I went with Bill May, and Lear was the co-pilot of the plane that took us over to Buena Vista, and there we landed, and another Huey took us up to the site, but he couldn't land. So he was about a meter off the ground, and Bill and I, one after the other, me first, had to jump off the skid onto snow. That's scary, guys. If you're hanging from the helicopter, that's one thing, you got a little control. But if you're jumping off, you just don't know what the landing site's going to be like. So it turned out we were fine. We were uninjured. We found that what had happened was that the reason the ELT lasted so long was it was running off of plane battery. And whoever, quote, turned it off during the previous day, 2 days before, had actually just put it onto its own battery, which was going to last, as Chuck told you, 72 hours. And so the first thing we did was we disconnected it and put it in one of our packs and took it back, and it's used for training purposes still. We took it for training purposes, and at least until recently it was still being used. And then we went and looked for signs of the pilot, which we didn't really find anything. And we basically got out to the end of the road. And that was the end of the mission. And so we learned some things from that mission. And just this evening, Jim Adams told me something I didn't know about that mission, which I think is interesting. And so, and also, as you notice, Jim took most of the pictures. So, Jim, you want to tell us the little, actually very interesting detail?
I learned from some ski searchers that when you find someone who's been lost and is depressed and cold, that hot lemon tea really makes them happy. So this is a thermos. It's indestructible, and if you get Lipton iced tea mix, it's sugary, it's astringent, has lemon, and it comes in powder form. So all you need is hot water and a little bit of that powder, and you can make a nice drink for people who really appreciate it. So when I first got in the plane, I said, would anybody like some hot lemon tea? And that really made them happier. And then I had a Sphia stove, and I just melted snow until the fuel ran out. When the Huey came back, it dropped a gallon of Coleman fuel, so that was good. The woman, Patricia, had gotten out of the plane a day or so before to wave at a helicopter. She stood on the wing, Saffron's wing, and fell and hurt her back. So for almost a day, she had been sitting on a seat in the plane supporting herself with her arms. And I got in the plane, and I had a sling, 15 feet of 1-inch tubular webbing. So I wrapped it around her and supported her weight with the sling wrapped around the seat, and then she could relax. She was wearing furry boots, red long underwear, and a hat, that's all. So when she relaxed, she started to get cold, and she started to really shake. So I was wondering if she would be shocky. So I had a little space blanket that you carry in your pocket, and I wrapped her up in the space blanket, and she felt good, and that sustained her until we carried her up to the helicopter. What else? That's all. Okay, so sling and space blanket, everybody carry it.
And that may be the only case in which the space blanket has actually been helpful for someone who was cold.
So I guess I have a question for Ken. You mentioned this really impacted you, and I think those mics will be live. I guess maybe for all of you, did this change how you did mountain rescue after this, or how you approached situations? Oh, yeah.
I don't know that it changed anything, but it certainly validated that you've got to find the victim. You can't just like assume what happened to them. And you've got to stick to your guns no matter how difficult it is. And I hope I've got the general impression across that it was difficult, that this was not a done deal. Yeah, but we wore out the CAP. They got tired of arguing with us, I guess.
It was Chuck was mentioning before the talk. There's a few things on this one I thought that was, there's a lot of things that can go right and a lot of things that can go wrong, and that really impacts the outcome. But going down the list on this one, I think, which is pretty amazing, is if you think about it, there's so many things that allow them to still survive, right? So between they didn't die crashing, which is fairly common. The fuselage was intact, right? They still had a shelter despite being heavy snow. An airliner reported the LT signal in that vicinity, because back then we didn't have all these satellites. I'm pretty sure, right? So if that airliner hadn't reported it, maybe nothing would have happened, right? The kind of ad hoc signal detection technique that they used to find, the actual location. The ground team that went in on the same day, got a strong enough signal to keep things moving, right? And the weather, right, cooperated enough to at least, get in. And I'm sure there's probably even more, they didn't all, one person left to get help, but they didn't all go and try to get help and maybe, perish in the way. So many things on this one which were pretty incredible. So, but fantastic having all of you here to explain this one. So, any questions from anyone in the audience?
Did they ever find out why they never filed a flight plan and why that plane was never reported missing? After all that period of time with I'm assuming that was a commercial flight.
Well, the actual Gary Meeks, the pilot, always filed a flight plan except this time. It was the report on it, and you're not required to file a flight plan, so that's not illegal. He was required to have an ELT, which of course was on board. It was not a commercial flight. He was the husband of the lady on board, so it was a family flight. Nobody reported that they didn't arrive because they had rented a place in Aspen and they just hadn't shown. That was that simple.
What's detune?
Oh, detune? What does detune mean, you mean?
Yeah.
Sure.
Sure. It's pretty simple. You've got a radio you probably listen to, an AM radio, and you tune your dial. And if you tune it right, you get a nice sound of music. If you click it one click off, you may still hear that station, but it'll be really scritchy and ugly. Now, if it's a close by station, that's how it can work. But if it's far away, if you turn it one click off, you won't hear it at all. So the thought that I had was, let me try this on this FM radio, because that works on FM also. And so I tuned the dial in the Huey, and the guy, the co-pilot looked at me, "What are you, nuts?" And okay, yeah, maybe. And so I tuned it to 121.55 instead of 121.50. And of course, I heard nothing, just like suggesting we were far from the signal. But then we flew around all the valleys, and when we got up near the Cronky Lake cirque, I could hear a distorted signal. And I said, aha, that's where this is coming from.
So that's when you had located it, when you say, we knew where it was anyway, we were listening to signal still, but we knew that.
Yeah, I think that comment refers to the fact that when I got up to the top of the ridge and got 25 microvolts, that's 20 times stronger signal on the ground with my antenna hiking in. And we knew that was line of sight and very close. I had not seen the plane. I couldn't see the plane. But then we came out, and then these guys went in the next day, and they knew that's where the plane would have to be.
Based on what Chuck had done the day before, we knew the location of the plane. We had a very high degree of confidence we were going to find it in the exact spot we found it. So we didn't care if we had a signal or not. We knew where to go.
Excellent. I think your mics are working now. But, any other questions?
I had a question about the ping pong racket.
Oh, the ping pong, sure. Oh, on the previous one. Yeah, let's do that one at the end. We'll kind of wrap that up. You can do, actually, there's a chance for everyone to talk to individual folks after too. So yeah, just find your rescuer you want to talk to, and they'll be available hopefully for a little bit. All right. Well, I just want to kind of wrap things up here. So thanks everyone for this. Appreciate it. So I want to wrap up tonight. We talked a lot about us today, RMR in the past, kind of bringing it back through the years to back today, and then looking at the future. And just to really, just 2 slides here. Just thinking about, when we started, it was just a handful of calls, and now we're up to 200, and we'll see where it goes. It keeps going up, or about three calls a year on average. And I think it's, come back to these 2 pictures, kind of how things started and where we are today. And I think it's a lot of kind of what we've heard. It's making it happen. It's adapting to what the needs are of the day. The needs of today are a lot of calls, and we'll see what the needs of tomorrow are. But we're looking towards the future, like Steve mentioned, on our headquarters, and we've come from the basement to above ground at a location without a basement, so we can't go below ground again, which is also good because it's there's some flood danger here. And then we're now looking towards the future. So with where we are with calls today, we're trying to adapt again with our facility and moving forward. So I think it's kind of a continued story of making it work for what we have at hand, and hopefully this comes up. So I wanted to bring up the really last thing on this was, and how's it happening? So hopefully folks are, if you're not aware, we are trying to find, funding for this facility and our team and emergency services, and that's happening currently through this emergency services ballot measure. So something that's coming up on the ballot this fall, and just want to make sure you all are aware of this Boulder County ballot measure. So with that, I'm going to just close with this final video.
Rescue Emergency Services respond to El Dorado Canyon State Park. 9 Neal Road on a fallen climber at 1458.
If they are below this roof, it's a very difficult spot to get to because this is a substantial sized roof.
Yep.
Yeah, this is Yellow Spur. Here's the base of the roof. This is like where the belayer is. The climber's like here right now.
There's 4 ropes there. We're only going to really need 1 for the 3.
RMR second tone, need more response to 9 Neal Road, the Red Garden Wall, have a fallen climber on the 5th pitch at 1513.
We were able to contact somebody in the area by cell phone that gave us a report about confirming that they're relatively minor injuries. Deployed rescuers up the back of the east slabs of the Red Garden Wall, most notably with a 600-foot rope that they carried up there with them. And then we lowered a rescuer down from the top. Our guy got himself lowered to the injured party, put a vacuum splint on him, and then we lowered him to the ground, and then we did a litter evacuation out from there. So we were lowering him just as the sun was disappearing. It was definitely below the line of the shadows by the time we got him to the ground, and then the litter evacuation was in the dark. We slowed down with litter evacuation because there's a lot of rockfall hazard in the area, and so we were trying to manage that as prudently as possible, which just takes more time. And knowing that he had minor injuries, we chose to go slower than we might have if he had been more severely injured.
Appreciate it.